All right. Good morning, everybody. So we're coming down to the last few talks for this year on nyoho, our year of tangible thusness, right? So we've been considering all year long, practicing with things made according to Dharma, or things being the same as Dharma. This is nyoho, right? So food, clothing, and shelter. And we've now moved into shelter. So this is one aspect of Soto Zen material culture, if you will. We're investigating the physical artifacts of our tradition, and also, right? So there's forms, there's physical artifacts of, the things that we encounter in our practice, and then there's always some larger meaning. So form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, and these are our gateways, right? Food, clothing, and shelter. So today we're continuing our consideration of nyoho shelter. To do that, let's start with the meaning of shelter itself, right? In English, shelter derives from shield. So in a religious context, a shelter is a place of physical and spiritual protection that provides refuge. Aha, there's a familiar concept, right? Something that provides refuge, security, safety, right? Safety from danger. So we go to Buddha, Dharma, Sangha for refuge, right? But refuge from what? Maybe we consider that a little bit when we take precepts or we do the three refuges. Refuge from what, right? From the suffering that happens as a result of greed, anger, and ignorance, right? Are the three poisons or three poisonous mind. And also from the karma that our unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind set in motion. So we have some delusion, we're caught up in greed, anger, and ignorance, we do something unskillful, we set some things in motion for ourselves and for other beings, right? Those things are not comfortable, right? Those things are not fun. So taking refuge is not about escaping the consequences of our actions. If we do things, things will happen, right? There is something called cause and effect, which we cannot escape from. So taking refuge is not about escaping the consequences of what we're doing. It's about helping us perhaps see how to avoid making those mistakes in the first place. And when we make them, then how do we encounter what comes from that, right? How do we live in the midst of this given, right? That there is suffering, that there is delusion, and we need to act somehow in the middle of that and not perpetuate it and not make it worse. And how do we sort of ameliorate that suffering? So shelter is a physical protection for our practice, right? We've been talking a lot about temples the last few talks, about sort of formal practice spaces, what those look like, what they mean, how we move through those. So not only does our physical shelter keep us out of the weather, keeps us safe from harm, but temples, dharma centers, our home practice places, wherever we are practicing, enable and support our zazen work study liturgy, right? So not only are they a protection from the elements, they also provide some kind of support, some kind of enabling for our practice. What we do there makes those things sacred spaces. So we're going to come back to that shortly, right? But one of the things we know, any place can be a sacred space, and any place can be a place of practice. What we do in that space is what determines that. So shelter is also an emotional protection. It's a spiritual protection. In the temple or in the zendo, we know we are doing some challenging practice, right? Zazen is not easy. Not only is it sometimes not easy on the body, but things arise that we would rather not look at. When we're facing the wall and facing ourselves, things come up that we would rather sort of not be in the middle of, and yet we know. It's safe to do that here. The things that arise in our minds, our ideas, our memories, our thoughts are not going to physically attack us, and also we are not, if we're practicing in the zendo with other people, we're not going to get up off the cushion and act on those feelings. If anger arises, I'm not going to get up off the cushion in the middle of a zazen period and go make that angry phone call, right? So this is a safe place to be in the midst of what can feel like a tornado of emotional stuff. We know we're okay. We're uncomfortable, but we're okay. This is a safe place to do that. We're embarking on this thing together with other people who share that aspiration for awakening and seeing reality and behaving skillfully in the world, right? We're all in this thing together. So if we feel some strong emotions, we know, as I say, we're not going to get up off the cushion, go act that out, set some karma, some unskillful karma in motion. We can just sit still in the midst of that and know somehow, really, things are okay. We also trust that practice and Buddha's teaching are good things. These are wholesome things in our lives. They're meaningful. They will help us lessen suffering, and we know that from our own personal experience. In the beginning, we know that we maybe develop some belief or some aspiration because we read Buddhist teachings, we meet a Buddhist practitioner, we say, something's going on there for me. This resonates with me somehow. This makes sense for me. Then we actually start to practice, and we really see how seeing into 3 poisons, seeing into the nature of suffering helps us let go of that. We build some momentum. So there are 5 elements of spiritual health sort of in the human experience. You've heard me talk about these before. A balance or integration between individual and universal, right? Or small self and universal self, self and whole. A feeling of hope, optimism. I am capable of getting through tough times. I understand where to turn when I'm feeling like I need help, support, right? An underlying sense of peace and well-being. Yes, things are tough right now, and underneath that, there is some equanimity. There is some well-being, some health that we can return to. A sense of purpose in life. Life has meaning. Now, I always say when we embark on the Bodhisattva vows, we have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. We always have something we can do. We have vowed to be bodhisattvas in this world in some way. Maybe you're wearing this stuff. Maybe you've only been to the Zendo once in your life. Somehow, right, there's an aspiration there that says, I'm here to liberate beings, including myself. I have something to do meaningfully. There's a reason for me to get out of bed every morning. There is something I can contribute to the world, which is a wonderful feeling, right? My life has meaning. My life has purpose. Last one is a clear understanding of our inner truths. What are those inner truths based on? What do I believe and why do I believe it? And are those beliefs serving me? Or are there some beliefs that I can let go of? Something happened and I created a worldview. And is that really true? And is that true for here and now? So those 5 things, important elements of our spiritual health. So we can read more about those on Sunshin Source. I've got some information out there. The point is, all of these dimensions of our practice, I think, give us a sense of security. What am I falling back on? What am I relying on? What am I taking refuge in? I know there's an underlying sense of peace. I know where to go when I need help. I know or have some sense of being part of something larger than myself that's supporting me, that's enabling my practice and holding me up. I think all of those things, if we really have spiritual health, are also a kind of shelter. They feel stable, they feel secure. Now, how do we consider the intersection of shelter, safety, refuge, and nyoho, things that don't create attachment? What's sitting in that intersection? We saw last time that nyoho buildings are unpretentious and appropriate in size and color and materials and all the other usual nyoho characteristics. But now we're talking about non-attachment to a non-physical space that doesn't have concrete elements. What does that mean? So I think this intersection has something to do with our willingness to take risks in our practice. We may come to practice initially because we're looking for comfort. We know in some way there is suffering. We might not be able to articulate it. We might not think we understand the nature of it. Somehow we're looking, searching for something, right? This is how we come to practice. We realize, there's something we would change if we could. So we want something to make us feel better. And we don't know what that is, and we don't know what it looks like, or exactly where to find it. We want something to make us feel better. That is perfectly reasonable. That's probably how most of us got here. There's something missing, there's something I would change. Very quickly, though, when we start to practice, we see that what we think of as being comfortable is not the goal of this practice. This sort of personal level of comfort is not the end point. That's not the goal. If we're attached to our practice and the 3 treasures as shields, shelter shields, or as painkillers, right? We've kind of missed the point. If we're waiting for the perfect circumstances in which to practice, well, of course, we're never going to practice, right? If we're trying to make everything just right in our practice world, again, we've missed the point. Well, I can't sit at home today because the neighbors are working on the roof and they're making too much noise. Well, really? That's going to stop you from practice. Isn't that attachment to a certain kind of environment, a certain kind of shelter? Things need to be absolutely silent. Well, really? We always say we ought to be able to do our zazen in a bus station. or in a shopping mall. It's simply the scenery of our zazen. So what's the real shelter? What's the real refuge? The room you're sitting in, or the spaciousness and the space and the spaciousness of our practice? What's the real room? What's the real shelter, right? Or how about, I'm scared to sit because things will come up in my mind that I don't want to think about. We've probably all been there. I don't want to sit today because I'm going through stuff. And if I sit down and face the wall, then I'm just going to be surrounded by my stuff. And we either might think that's too painful, I don't want to do it, or we might think, well, there's no point in my practice because I'm so distracted. I can't do good practice because I'm so distracted. Well, isn't that attachment to a certain kind of shielding from things that make us uncomfortable? And we know this practice is about going deeply into the things that make us uncomfortable. So protection is not the same as avoidance or escape. A shield, a shelter is not an escape from these things that make us uncomfortable. Our practice can help to protect us from perpetuating suffering by seeing the nature of it, how we create it for ourselves, how we create it for others. That is a sort of protection, but it's not designed to help us ignore unwholesomeness and its karmic consequences. So we do things that are unwholesome, there will be karmic consequences. Our practice does not shield us from those consequences and from the suffering. So our practice is a challenge. Sometimes it's difficult or awkward or uncomfortable, right? If we are attached to our own comfort, we're going to bypass myriad dharma gates in our practice, myriad opportunities to get clarity on things, to make a healthier circumstance in the long run. If I avoid seeing my greed, anger, and ignorance, I am never going to learn anything about them, and I'm simply going to keep repeating those patterns and perpetuating suffering, right? So on the one hand, of course, anywhere and everywhere that we engage in practice is sacred space. As I say, it's what we do in the space that determines that. That means there's no real difference between sacred and not sacred. And we've heard plenty of teachings from Soto-san and others about, purity and defilement. And is there really such a thing as purity and defilement? So we have good and bad, and we go beyond good and bad. We hear this all the time, right? So sacred space is the same pattern. There's sacred space and not sacred space, and going beyond that distinction. But there are places somehow that we consider to be special, and we treat them with reverence, and we treat them with respect. When we enter these spaces, we may carry out rituals like bowing when we enter this room, or removing our shoes, or in some cultures, removing a hat or something, right? There may be some ritual we go through when we enter a sacred space. We may agree to refrain from certain activities like talking really loudly, or wearing our earbuds, or wearing certain kinds of loud clothing, moving carelessly in a certain kind of way, right? We may decide there are things we're not going to do in this space, as well as things we are going to do in this space. Something feels significant about sacred space, either because of something that's happening there now, like zazen, or liturgy, or dharma study, or ceremonies, right? Or because it reminds us of a being or an event like Buddha's awakening, or 20 years of people taking precepts, or committing to a lifetime of practice. There's something about that that makes that a special place, a sacred space. So sacred space might be found in a location that everybody says is sacred, whether that's all the followers of a particular religious tradition, people who appreciate a certain natural setting. Maybe there's a particular mountain, a particular walking labyrinth, a particular historical place. Everyone sort of agrees something about this place, right? And it might be because you're tuned into energy meridians, and it might be because you're tuned into history. There's lots of things we find valuable in that space. It might be your own personal sacred space because it means something personal to you. This is where I met my significant other, right? This is the hospital in which my children were born. This is where something important happened to me. There's some particular meaning for you there. It gives you an opportunity for reflection, for connecting small self and universal self. There was something to happen to me in this space, or happen to a family member or something in this space that happened to small self, and yet it's not unconnected from universal functioning. So we return to that space, and it gives us that opportunity to reflect on that. So after my mother died, I sponsored a brick in her name. In the library, they were doing a library renovation in the town where I was living. It was not the town where she had lived, but it was the town where I was living, and they were doing a big library renovation. My mother loved to read, and I always, I hung out in the library too. So they were doing this renovation, and they said, of course, it was a fundraiser. People could sponsor a brick. So she loved to read. She had 2 grandchildren, so my brick is in the children's reading garden. And it says, has a quote something that she used to say. She grew up in Mexico, so this is a Spanish quote. And I put her name on it, right? So when I go back to the Twin Cities, I try to get over there, see my mother's brick. Brush the leaves off of it. It's a nice natural setting, so I sit there a little bit with the brick. Remember my mother. My mother never saw that library. She was never there. But there's something about the brick that says my mother is there, right? So I get to go sit with her brick and spend a little time with my mother. I need to go do that. I haven't been there in a while. Okay. So that's sort of a sacred space for me, and you may have a similar thing. There may be something which is meaningful for you that gives you that chance to practice, reflect a little bit. So in any event, usually a sacred space is where we go to connect with something which is larger than ourselves, larger than us, to step back for a while from distraction, right? This busy samsaric world on fire. We get to remind ourselves, oh yes, there is also the world of emptiness. There is also the world of equanimity and balance and peace and spaciousness and something which is bigger than my greed, anger, and ignorance. So you may have seen robes or paper chains or things tied around huge rocks or ancient trees in Japan. That's a Shinto practice. It recognizes that those natural features are sacred. When I was living at Hokioji, we had a huge cherry tree, which came to be called the Venerable Cherry. It was a huge tree. Eventually it had to come down, right? We had a ceremony for it. There's something about the ancientness of that universal functioning that tree springs up and for many years is there. And we can feel the same way about rocks and waterfalls and other things, right? So sacred space doesn't come into existence simply as another sort of physical nyoho object. In this case, things made according to Dharma, again, is also about what we do in that space. What are we making in that space by our activity? So the most important thing going on there is connection. That's connection between past, present, and future, between form and emptiness, between small self and universal self, between practitioners, between Sangha members, reinforcing some communal identity. We share some things in that space. Whether that's we share our own memories of being in that space, or we share a commitment to practice, or we share a reflection on our ancestors. There's some connection there, right? Expressing reverence, paying attention to our deportment is part of making that connection. So again, we come into that sacred space, we behave in a certain way. We do some things and we don't do some other things, right? For us, that might include putting on rakusu, or dressing appropriately in modest clothes that aren't distracting to other people, thinking about what are we doing in this space with other people. Also carrying ourselves in a certain way, right? Standing up straight, doing gassho, bowing in a certain way, going along with the customs of the Sangha about what happens in that space. We're entering into something together. So when we considered the Shishido Garan a week or two ago, or a few weeks ago, we saw it includes a series of gates into the temple complex, and that when we pass through the gates, we're symbolically freed from greed, anger, and ignorance. The Sanmon, the 3 gates, right? Somehow passing through the gates, we let go of greed, anger, and ignorance. We enter into a sacred space. This is a space which is separate from the mundane world, from the samsaric world on fire. We've sort of physically passed through a gate and said, okay, I'm leaving that behind. I'm entering into something else. There is something particular, there's something special about this space. So in this space, we act in a certain way. We do certain things. That's part of what purifies it. I also think entering into that space is a means of breaking preoccupation. And we do that every time we come into the Zendo. Maybe you feel it in your body. You start to get close to the Zendo door, and you start pulling yourself together, and you step over the threshold, you gassho and bow in an intentional way. Whew. There's something about dropping preoccupation. Your body knows, okay, now it's time to practice. And it might be that when you sit at home, you have a certain set of rituals that you do. Maybe you light a candle, maybe you offer incense, and if you do that every day in that space, your body goes, oh yes, I understand. This is now a sacred space. I'm entering into something here, which feels important. So, in a traditional Soto, across the threshold, there is an actual threshold. You are stepping over something. You physically have to, right, sort of climb into the Zendo. You really know in your body. You're very consciously, intentionally entering into something or leaving behind worldly activities, orienting ourselves toward the three treasures, toward practice, toward Zazen, in the same way that we enter that complex through the gate and leave that world kind of behind. So we do some more elaborate purification when we're doing something like Ryakusatsu. If it's time to do Ryakusatsu, we should be bathing or showering before we get here, before the ceremony. If we can't do that, we should at least wash our hands. There is something about that purification which is helpful. Then we offer incense on the way to the Zendo. We put the incense in the kitchen because that hallway is narrow. We come through, we offer incense and purify our robes, right? You take the corners 3 times to the right, all the corners, over the incense. You're sort of purifying yourself again. Then, once we're all gathered, we invoke all the Buddhas and ancestors, and what do? We do the repentance verses. Whew! Again, purifying, letting go of our ancient twisted karma, sort of clearing the decks, right? Wiping the slate clean. So we purify the actual physical space with the Ino walking around with the water, right? So, I mean, look at all these layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of creating a sacred space together. This is just a room in a basement, right? And yet, look at all the things we're doing to declare this is a sacred space. We're entering into it together. We're doing important practice together. You know, to even to sprinkling water all the way around. So if you're here or you see it at home, you can see the Ino goes behind all the people and creates a perimeter. It's like that's the sacred perimeter. Nothing bad can come in, right? No delusion can come in after that. We've kind of sealed the room up. Okay, so Ryakusatsu is a practice of removing, letting go of defilement, delusion, returning to purity, sacredness, aspiration, precepts, right? And the way we interact with the space reflects that, reflects our intention and what we're doing together. What we do here is also a nyoho version, if you will, because it's a much, much simplified version of the very elaborate ceremony you would see in a Senmon Soto in Japan, right? It goes on much longer, more nada shimono, no more instruments, more things, more chanting in a very ancient, melodious kind of way, right? We do a very simple version here that kind of gets to the point. So in that way, it's nyoho. It's appropriate for who we are and where we are, and what is not nyoho about that. So within sacred space, we ourselves, the Sangha as a whole, are pure and sacred no matter what we think of ourselves, right, individually. Otherwise, we may come into this space thinking, man, I'm really, I'm not in a good place today. I've done some things I regret, you know, I'm feeling kind of angry. And yet, we come into a sacred space, and all of us and our practice and what we're doing here sort of takes that on, right? The last thing the Doshi chants at the end of the Ryakusatsu, may the sweet dew of the merit of expounding the precepts moisten the entire Dharma world, and may all living beings venerate the sacred assembly, right? Everyone who's joined into this thing is part of this sacred assembly. So we've got the purification that goes with renewing the precepts, extending to the entire Dharma world. Now there is no place that is not part of this pure Dharma world by virtue of what we've done in this space. We ourselves are now a sacred assembly, worthy of veneration. Isn't that interesting? And that's not about having some kind of ego-driven idea about now we're perfect, wonderful practitioners. It's interesting to sort of sit and consider, what does that mean, the sacred assembly? That comes from practicing in a certain way in the sacred space. So our activities have created the sacred space, and they've also created our own sacredness, if you will. So what we do here is a reflection, a manifestation of the most important central beliefs, teachings, values, right, of our tradition. So here we have a physical experience of emptiness and a physical experience of awakening. So every time we arrive at the cushion, as we did this morning, we are arriving at the Bodhi tree. Just like Buddha arrived at the Bodhi tree. Every time we sit, we reenact Buddha's awakening. So as we've discussed previously, there is only one temple. There is only one Bodhi tree. There is only one sacred space. There's only one awakening that we all enter into. It's all right here. At the same time, there's something called pilgrimage. right? There's something called moving toward a particular important sacred space, which may be many thousands of miles from where we are. So I can tell you it's a very powerful experience to physically travel to a place where something really important happened in this tradition or is accepted to have happened, right? In that way, we're sort of creating sacred space too. We agree to accept that there's a story that happened in a certain place, right? But it creates that space. And there's something really, really powerful about that. There are 8 major Buddhist pilgrimage sites, right? So other traditions have pilgrimage sites, and we do as well. 4 are where the Buddha was born and experienced awakening and gave his first sermon and where he died. And 4 are places where he spent significant time, or they're sites of particularly important stories from Scripture. So I don't live in the magic world, but I had a very strange experience when I visited Sarnath, which is where the first Sangha gathered and Buddha gave his first sermon. You know, I'm not somebody who's prone to kind of magic world stuff, but I'll just say it was quite a profound experience for me, and not one I expected. There's something about really feeling like you're in that space with Buddha. It's really interesting, right? When I've been in Dogen's temples, I sort of picture him walking around, being in the being in the Soto with his students, doing his teaching there, right? I can sort of picture him being in that space, being there with his monks. You can't help but feel when you're in a space like that, no matter what your space is, you can't help but feel some kind of awe, wonder, reverence, right? That makes these places sacred. And it's part of nyoho because there's this connection to the past. Well, good news is you don't have to go to India or Japan to experience a sacred space. We all know that. If nature really speaks to you, then simply being outdoors is entering a sacred space. You can also be intentional about creating sacred space to encompass your practice at home, to embrace your practice and support it. So decide what kind of sacred activities you're going to be doing in that space, and that means whatever is sacred for you. It might be traditional things, but it might be other things, whatever is sacred for you. Then decide what that space needs to be like in order to support that intention, to support those activities or whatever that practice is for you. So Dogen tells us clearly what he thought the optimal zazen space was like. He says you need a quiet room. You take your thick mat, you put your cushion on it. It should be someplace without smoke or drafts. Now, of course, you know, he's living in a time where there were fires for everything, cooking and heating and whatnot, right? So I'm thinking he's not talking incense smoke. So without smoke, without drafts, someplace that provides shelter from the rain, someplace that provides shelter from the dew, from the wet, the moisture, someplace that's warm enough and also cool enough and not completely dark. And that's all. He doesn't ever say you need an altar like this, right? Your cushion has to be this kind of color. Your robes need to look in a certain way. I mean, he does tell us how to arrange ourselves to sit, right? But he's not describing an elaborate temple. He's saying you need a place that supports your practice, and that's all. Go in, put down your cushion. It's hot enough, it's cool enough, it protects, you know, you got a roof over your head. Sit down. That's it. Sounds like a nyoho shelter to me. So we can help the purity of the space by keeping it clean, and that means both dusting, sweeping, keeping it clean, right? Free of clutter, miscellaneous stuff. Sometimes we want to turn our altars into spiritual sort of souvenir shelves. We have to be careful about what goes on an altar. You can have those things. I'm going to suggest somewhere else. It should be comfortable enough to practice in without being distracting. So we should keep it fresh. That means changing the water or the flowers, if that's what you do in your space. Other offerings, maybe that's lighting a candle. There's something about lighting a candle which dispels. We'll talk about in a minute. Ringing a bell. There's something about a bell. There's something about the sound, right, permeating the space, which can be purifying, cleansing, freshening. So we can enter into and care for our sacred space with attention, with intention. It's taking care of us. We need, a part of our practice is also to take care of that space. So part of creating and maintaining that sacred space of your own can be considering nyoho elements, the things that we've talked about this year, color and size and materials, atmosphere, what materials or artifacts you put in there, the size of your room, whatever, right? Considering all of those can be part of your practice. If you have an altar, and you don't have to at home, but if you do, it's good to include elements of air, earth, fire, and water. those are grounding, right? It really means we're here and now with this planet, with this earth, right? So we have small water offerings, at least we do here. We change them every morning. We offer the pure fresh water of wisdom to those who search for the Dharma, right? Water itself, there's not much fresher than fresh water. So we're offering something. We're thirsting for Dharma. Fresh flowers represent the earth. They also remind us of impermanence, right? Unless they're plastic, they're not going to last forever. So every morning or two, we're caring for flowers, changing water, taking away dead flowers. Incense burner represents the air. Fragrance is also a purification of the space. It permeates everywhere. And the candle represents fire and wisdom that dispels the darkness of ignorance. So we can see why lighting a candle can be a nice ritual, part of our practice. So, earth, air, fire, and water, right here on the altar. Here's our space. There's usually an inspirational figure there, somebody like Shakyamuni. Traditionally, if you're in a larger space, there's Dogen to the right, Keizan to the left, and that is One Buddha, Two Founders. And to learn more about One Buddha, Two Founders, you can go out to Sanshin Source. Look at Buddhist Essentials. There's an entry there, One Buddha, Two Founders, right on our altar with us. So Shakyamuni is raised on a platform. If you look at an altar, Shakyamuni always has to be higher than your head when you're sitting. But in some way, Shakyamuni is on a platform that represents Mount Sumeru. And we've talked about Mount Sumeru here. When we talked about the Shichido Garan, right? We talked about, in Buddhist cosmology, this is a mythical mountain, right? In the center of the universe, it's the home of the gods, and everything is arranged around that mountain. So we raise up Buddha in that way. So we also saw that in the temple complex, the closer you move to the middle, the closer you move to Buddha's hall, the more sacred that space is considered to be. So here again, the altar. On the altar, we have a representation of that space. Now we see the pattern with Buddhist cosmology and our altars and the temple complex in a traditional place. So as much as we need to take care of our physical spaces and the things in them, the physical things in them, of course, we also have to practice non-attachment. Nyoho is about, does this thing create attachment? So when we set up our space at home, that can feel very personal, and we can become really attached to it. I remember where I got this Buddha figure, and these flowers came out of Grandma's garden, and right, there's a lot of things in there. We have to be careful about attachment, right? The sacredness of the space is not about the objects themselves. Yes, those things will open some Dharma gates for us, but the things themselves are not where that sacredness resides. It's not separate from the total functioning of this moment. So those are Dharma gates, but they're also just cushions and candles and floors and walls. Just like this room. It's nothing but cushions and candles and floors and walls. And yet, right, we come into this space, something is happening here. We set some intention about practice and awakening, and then we ascribe various meanings to the space in which we do that practice. So it's the intention, the experience, the forms, the rituals, the emotions of the people engaging with the space that make that a sacred space. The space and the objects within the space support our practice, but they are not where our awakening resides, right? Where does our awakening reside? We can't point to a place. So we're reminded of this every time, I think, a new visitor arrives and doesn't know how to step into the room or where to stand in relation to the altar or how to hold a sutra book, right? Our instinct is to help that person understand. Here's how we are as a community. Here are the things we share together in a sacred space. But these things don't have sacred meaning for them yet. This is just a book. If I put it on the floor, it doesn't matter. Oh, wait a minute. There's a bigger story happening here, right? Folks don't come in with that awareness, which is, I think, a really interesting reminder that this is not where awareness is. This is not where awakening is, right? Awakening is everywhere. So this doesn't mean that any certain place or any certain object is any more sacred than any other, or that awakening isn't sort of already here, but it can help our practice to even temporarily designate a sacred space. When we go out on a work day and bow to the altar in the garden, that is a sacred space. Now the rest of the week, we're mowing the grass, we're walking past it, we might not be thinking of it that way, but somehow for the purpose of gathering up and initiating work practice, that even temporarily becomes a sacred space. So we focus our practice in that even temporarily sacred space, right? We come together as a community there. So we started this morning with the 3 refuges as our ultimate shelter. That's where I'm going to end up today. We take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha as a shelter, as a shield, as a protection. But of course, these 3 refuges are really one thing. So that's the complete functioning of this moment of reality. We can point to Buddha, we can point to Dharma, we can point to Sangha, but ultimately, there is no separation in these refuges. There's only one refuge. So Toto-san has said, this reality is what we take refuge in. This is the shelter. This is home. Home means wherever we go, we return to reality. We are born within reality. We are living within reality. We are dying within reality. This is a shelter. This is a home. This is where we live and nothing else. This absolute reality is Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and we take refuge within this absolute reality. So like nyoho clothing and nyoho food, nyoho shelter and Dharma are one thing. This one thing is ichi nyo, right? Nyoho, ichi nyo, one and the same. So eho ichi nyo, robe and Dharma are one. Zenkai ichi nyo, Zen and precepts are one. We keep coming back to this teaching. There's so many gates, so many Dharma gates in this tradition that point us back to such and so are one thing. They can't actually be separated. So studying and practicing with nyoho begins to show us all the ways that whatever we're dealing with and Dharma are one thing. If we've created a separation, we've created the separation. Whatever this is and Dharma are one thing. This shelter, this robe, this meal, and Dharma are one thing. So home means wherever we go, we return to reality. So we wake up and see there's nothing outside of this one unified reality, no matter where we go in body and mind. Are we making a pilgrimage? Are we going into the zendo? Are we going to work? Are we getting into the car? It doesn't matter. Home means wherever we go, we return to reality. So the refuge, the shelter, is an understanding that this is what's real, this is what we're really encountering and dealing with, not the stuff in our heads, not the stories we're making up, the dreams, the illusions, right? They're real in that you are really encountering them, you're really creating them, but are you acting on them, right? What is the real reality? If we're responding only to the stuff in our heads, we've lost touch with reality in a very real way, right? Then there's no way that whatever we're doing is going to make sense or going to be skillful, right? It's disconnected from the universal functioning of this moment. So you're asking a question, I'm responding to a whole different question. Or a need arises and I'm responding to a whole different need. It's a complete disconnect because what I'm responding to is this. How can I return home to this moment of reality and see what's really going on here? So I think Buddhas and ancestors are telling us, go home, man. Go home, seek shelter. And where do you find that? Do your best to ensure that you and others are spiritually safe, if you will, by looking up and seeing what's really going on. What is actually being offered in this one moment of reality? Are you really here, or are you somewhere else? It can certainly be tempting to try to escape our karmic circumstances by pretending that things don't exist if they're painful, or that things are different if they're not the way we want them. That can be a fun break sometimes, sometimes mentally. We need a break from this samsaric world on fire. We just need to know that that's what we're doing. I'm going to think about something else for a while to give my body and mind and soul a rest is fine, as long as we know. We're going to have to come back to it. We're putting a pin in it, right? But we have to come back to it. In the end, we all know, completely ignoring our circumstances, pretending they don't exist is not going to help. It's just going to perpetuate suffering. So, although it seems counterintuitive, the real shelter is what's right here. As challenging as that may be, as challenging as that may seem, we may want to run away from what's really going on and saying, my shelter is somewhere else. But in our practice, the reality is the shelter is what's here. Here and now is the only place, the only time we can actually take some action. So if we're living in our dreams, that's not where we can really turn things around, right? That's not where we can address needs and ameliorate suffering and help beings, including ourselves. At the same time, Sawaki Roshi said that everyone is homeless, and it's a mistake to think that we have a fixed home anywhere, right? Homeless Kodo, after all. He ought to know. So if there's no fixed home, no fixed shelter, then universal functioning is our shelter. There is nowhere other than here we can go to get away from, right? No fixed home, no fixed shelter. There is only one shelter, and this is it. So here we are again. There's only one temple, there's only one shelter. This is it. It might be a temple, it might be your house, it might be a garden, it might be a mountaintop, whatever is a sacred space for you, whatever is a shelter for you, and also it's not separate from the shelter for everybody else, because it's just this one universal, this moment of universal functioning. So sometimes we might designate a sacred space that might feel a little bit more of a refuge than a shopping mall, right? Or a gravel quarry or something. We might just point out a little space and say, this is going to be a sacred space, at least for now, at least for me. We might do that in order to take shelter, but we're also getting back in touch with reality as universal functioning. We're entering into that sacred space in order to get back in touch with here and now, no matter where that sacred space is. So that's true. And also, we carry shelter with us everywhere by simply carrying out our practice, right? By simply embodying awakening. And when I think about that, I think, well, that's like the turtle with the house on its back, or the snail with the house on its back, right? We're never without shelter, because we're never without Buddha Dharma Sangha. We're never without this practice. We're never without awakening, right? We can return home at any time we want. So what would you all like to say about sheltering in sacred spaces? Rotoku.
I'm curious about what was on your mother's brick you didn't tell us before.
So unfortunately, I don't remember the Spanish off the top of my head, but it's something like, how nice it is to do nothing and after doing nothing to rest.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. Spanish was her first language, so I put it in Spanish. And I don't know if Sagan knows that expression, but I don't know Spanish, but yes. So that's wisdom from my mother. Other things about sacred space, shelter, nyoho shelter. In the room, and then we'll ask people at home. Are you good? Owen.
I have it in my mind, and I wonder if this sounds fair. You know, a little bit of a distinction within like ways of thinking about what's sacred. I'm thinking kind of more kind of contemplative style of sacredness, which I think is mostly the theme you've been describing. Come to a space, center, ground, regulate to some extent. But then, as you're saying, there's like a risk and there's like a courage in that too. I'm thinking that a lot of traditions, many traditions, have a kind of more ecstatic, fervor kind of aspect to sacredness, where you're intentionally trying to like, I wonder if there's a space for that.
Well, I think various traditions manifest the connection between small self and universal self in different ways. And one of the ways, so not being from an ecstatic tradition, my impression is that is a connection between small self and universal self, right? Because by doing that, whether you are dancing, right? That's an ecstatic tradition, the spinning, or chanting, or whatever your ecstatic tradition is. I think that's a connection. It's another way to put aside small self and say there's something bigger than me. And to connect not only with a universal self, but with the other people who are doing that practice. There is some energy, right? There's some collective energy that happens if everybody's chanting, or everybody's dancing, or everybody's clapping, or something, right? So I think that manifests differently in different traditions, but I think there's a through line. And I hadn't thought about it until you brought it up. But I think that's part of the human spiritual experience. Yeah?
I think it's interesting. I think the etymology of this ecstatic is standing outside.
Oh, interesting.
You're standing maybe outside of your small self.
Of course. Excellent. Yeah. Standing outside of your small self. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. It's an interesting through line. Please.
Just that brought to mind, years ago, Todo-san quoted like an academic text about different types of meditation in the Buddhist tradition. And that particular academic author described meditation as n-static. So the inverse of ecstatic.
Wow, that's interesting. N-static versus ecstatic. That's interesting.
So I just thought I'd throw that out
Thank you. Yeah. Well, now we're going to go home and chew on stuff, right? 'Cause this is really, but this to me, this is the juice of this practice. Is I throw stuff out there and then people start doing this. I just think that's the fun part. Who cares what I have to say? This is the fun part. Interesting. Thank you for that. Other things in the room. Sawyer.
So thinking about altars. Interesting. So of course, Koshin led our home altar workshop. Maybe when was that? Like a month and a half ago. And Mark also built an altar, and it was interesting for me. I had a little bit of a conflict about whether I wanted to do this or not, whether I wanted to put myself into the creation of an altar. Part of me felt very drawn to it because it felt like a way to immediately experience in a physical way this kind of Dharma object. And by actually moving your hands around and putting things together, you're right there. But I also sort of already had an altar, which was just using an old, it was an object, like a little stand that belonged to my grandmother. So that had this personal connection, and it also felt like I was just using what was already available. And so I was a little bit like, what do I do here? What's sort of aligned? Do I just use what I already have, be satisfied? Although another thing that kind of pushed me towards doing it is the studio apartment that I live in. The door has a habit of just, if you open the door, it swings open because of the way that the house is leaning a little bit. And it would always, it was not uncommon for it to strike the altar, because the altar was in the corner. That was the only space it could go. And it would bump into the altar, and Buddha would fall off. And so I was like, I need to do something. So I either need to be very careful with this door, or I need to make a new altar, or use a different object. So anyway, of course, I did end up creating this altar. My dad helped me mount it on the wall, which turned out to be a brick wall.
Oh.
And so we had all this trouble, like getting through, drilling through, so that we could get screws in there. Somehow it's in there and it's stable, I think. And it has really affected the space. It feels much less kind of accidental and more intentional, like it actually fits. But I guess this is kind of just it's a nyoho question between sort of arranging things in a particular way that fits versus using what you already have and adapting yourself to it. How do you see that kind of aspect of practice, I guess?
So I don't think there's one answer, because what it comes down to is appropriateness, right? So on the one hand, you have the appropriateness of using things you already had, things from your grandmother, connection to the past, right? And on the other hand, you have the appropriateness of a altar which is now not in danger of being knocked over 3 times a day, and is maybe in a place you can see it differently, right? So I don't think there's a right or wrong about that. I think looking at any sort of endeavor like that from the point of view of materials and size and color, you have to make a choice. So if you had, so what you had up until that point was probably fine, and then if you have the opportunity to do something else, that's also fine. my impression is not that you were running to make a new altar because somehow you thought it would make your practice better, or that it would be more glamorous, or more, it would reflect on you in some particular way. Then I would say, well, there's something there to think about. I don't think that's what you were doing. And my guess is you were also participating in that workshop because we're participating with Sangha in a certain way, right? You were coming together with other people to learn from Hoshin and create a practice, something to support practice, which is also good, right? So I think it's a win-win. And my guess is grandmother's things have been redeployed in some way, and the things have moved off grandma's altar and up into this one, so you're not sort of throwing things out and starting again. So I think the value of what you're bringing up is the process of reflecting about that, not necessarily coming to a conclusion, but the fact that you're reflecting about that, right? So interesting. It's one of the potential benefits of having an altar at home, right? You get to think about that stuff for yourself because nobody's providing it for you. So, other things in this room. Corey.
I have a few thoughts that emerged while you were talking. I kind of connected what you were talking about to what I had read while reading Living by Vow. And particularly I thought part of delusions are separate from awakening. And so therefore you need to take good care of your delusions. And I was thinking that refuge also is taking good care of your delusions. And it kind of puzzled me when I first read that part, but then I've been thinking about this for a while. And I think part of what that means is constantly reassessing your held beliefs, because like us human beings have a problem in that we seem to live in an infinite universe, but yet we only have a finite capacity to understand it. So we need abstractions in that universe. So I don't know, that just kind of strikes me as being nyoho for ideas.
Yeah. So the last talk I'm going to give about this, I'm going to go beyond food, clothing, and shelter, and how do we think about nyoho beyond those three dharma gates, right? Because of course nyoho is not tied to those three things, but those are three really useful ways to get into it, right? So I want to back up to your comment about constantly reassessing your beliefs. I think I would rephrase that as being open to changing your beliefs based on your experience of real reality. So it's not a question of constantly psychoanalyzing ourselves or constantly second-guessing ourselves. And also, if reality is in front of me and it's challenging something that I believe in, and how am I going to know that? I'm going to feel it in my body. There's going to be some kind of dissonance. I'm going to feel angry or anxious or something, right? Can I be open to, wait a minute, maybe my perception of this is not the entirety of the story, and be willing to investigate that. So I'm not necessarily waking up every day and saying, okay, now here's my list of what I believe. I'm not saying you're doing this, right? But here's my list of what I believe in, and is this still true today? I think reality is going to gently bump us around and give us those opportunities to say, now wait a minute, is this still true? Or was this ever true, right? Or is this something I inherited from somebody and maybe that's not my worldview, yeah? But the openness is important. That's absolutely, I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, I feel like that's a better way of putting that.
That's why we throw out reflections of Sangha, so I'll get to chew on it, right?
Yeah.
Well, you started with that issue with worldview and belief,
Mm-hmm.
and the interconnection of the two is quite interesting.
Mm.
Sometimes I summarize Nagarjuna as saying that he said, this is me saying he said it, all worldviews are false if you believe they're ontologically true.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes on to discuss instrumentalism. That is, beliefs are instrumentally true, not ontologically so.
Yeah, and I think Buddha would agree, right? Other things in this room, Doju.
Curious what you think about this, but I think at the Senmonso and so at the training monastery in Japan, where we supposed to go in theory to spend 6 months practicing in sort of the old-fashioned way, to some
Traditional
extent.
way.
It kind of, the sort of idea of refuge and sacred space almost becomes inverted in a way, because the entire complex is a sacred space. And you're almost part of the sacred space too, like you're kind of part of this sacred object. And in a way, your refuge becomes the few spaces that are somehow not sacred.
Yes, yes, absolutely right.
So in the case of the traditional like study hall, the shuryo, like for us was a space where only the training priests could be.
Yeah.
So traditionally speaking, it also should be a sacred space, but sort of in practice for us, it was like kind of the place where you could let your hair down a little bit, so to speak. And then also the sort of refectory, the dining, informal dining hall, like sometimes would become like where they would have like the evening meetings, as they call them, the like little parties sometimes.
Yes.
And those were sort of the only two spaces. Everywhere else was kind of like sacred in some way. And in the case of Kotaiji, where I was, it's also surrounded by like 100 acres of graveyards that are also sacred. So even like you could walk half a mile and you're still in the sacred space. So I'm curious, like, what your experience with that is like, and what you think about that.
I think the important thing to understand when we enter into the Zen Soto is there is no escape. You really feel like there is no escape. And that is such an interesting circumstance in which to practice, right? Because there is no escape. And you're walking down the hall, you don't think anybody's looking at you. And someone's going to go, ew! Such and so is crooked, Don't run. I always got called on for running because I was always in a hurry because I was trying to get to the next thing. No running, right? Somebody was always looking and ready to correct me, right? I'll just say I remember the feeling that for me, Zazen was a bit of a refuge, not because I was anxious to sit down and let go of thinking, but because I got to sit in one place for 40 minutes without moving, and I was not expected to know something I didn't know. I was not expected to do a ceremony I'd never seen before. Right? So yes, we did the occasional potato chip party and whatnot, and it was usually somebody's room. We weren't bold enough to actually go out into the kitchen, So those things happen, and I just think that's sort of how we maintain mental balance. I think we just, in order to sort of stay healthy, there are times where we have to sort of step back from that a little bit. But there's also something uniquely challenging about being in that container, because everything is practice, and boy, you can't forget. Because if you do, someone will remind you, and they're being kind, right? Because they're trying to support our practice. So no matter what you're doing, you're cleaning the toilet, you're cooking a meal, you're walking around, somebody's going to remind you that what you're doing is practice in a sacred space. And so I agree with you that you're all, so that everybody in that temple is holding that space and is part of that sacred functioning. And to not forget that is really interesting, because we enter into that space, we feel like I'm a Westerner, I'm not fluent in the language, I don't know how to carry stuff, right? I don't know what I'm doing, I feel like the greenest person here, and who cares? You are expected to be a part of that functioning sacred space. And in a way that's scary, but in a way that's really empowering. It says you have something to contribute, and we don't see a reason why you can't be practicing just like everybody else. You're not special in that way. You're not especially limited. So on the one hand, it feels like, why are you pushing me? You should give me a break. I don't get it. I don't speak the language. I don't read the language. I don't know what's going on. And on the other hand, wait a minute. I'm supposed to be functioning just like everybody else. I'm not special in that way. There's something really, it shifts your thinking. Yeah, that's interesting. Where do we get away from this thing? And there are days, if there'd been a jet plane in the yard, I would have gone out and got on it, because it's hard. But you go in knowing that it's hard and that it's challenging, and at the same time it's wholesome, right? You can't go in there looking for a reward, but at the same time there's just something about being in that container 24/7 for months, which is really helpful. Anyway, other things in this room. Okay, I want to acknowledge that Shoto is with us today. My sister Shoto is up there. And actually, although you don't have your hand up, I want to call on you and see if you have anything to say, because if there's anyone in the room that knows something about sacred space, I think you're that person. Would you like to share anything from your wells of wisdom?
Oh, thank you. I would be happy to. I was planning to raise my hand at some point.
Good.
So I will first say that when you talked about the things we do, creating or acknowledging sacred space, I think a lot about this. And I have never heard people talk about that stuff in Zen. I look at it and I see it from my other life.
Yeah.
And so yeah, all those things and the four elements and let me see. Oh, yeah, so like if you go someplace, so I have several altars on at the farm, which is semi-wild, and they're not built altars, like there's a bluff here and there's a rock there and stuff. But if you go and talk to them, or if you make offerings, and there are all kinds of offerings you can make, if you make offerings to them, it's like it increases that quality. It's like we enhance space by interacting with it. And actually, I think, well, it used to be when I traveled, I would go looking for places to go and make offerings and talk to and listen to. And I'm still in my travels. Have I done that? I don't know. But I have been in the last 2 months, I don't know, at least 10. I would have to look to count them, 10 different Zen centers, a couple of Buddhist, one Quaker. But anyway, to seeing the different styles and forms of the way people build a local Sangha and the all the hybrid stuff and the different technologies that people do and the different places in the city where you have to go past two security things to get in, and places in the country where they usually lock the doors. But it's just amazing to me how many ways there are to do this. um, I'm like and so I've watched local teachers interact with their sanghas. My sangha is still 5 people on Zoom. um, and I'm still frustrated. Um, but there we go. I've abandoned them, and they say that I have to take over the group when I get back. So okay. I I think the person I left it with is doing fine. Anyway, um, so there is that. It's like there was a long time ago when someone said about me, "Well, what you want is just to spend all your life in sacred space," and I was like, that sounded right to me. And so that's not the community-based sacred space, or it's created by the community that is all the beyond human beings. And so I recognize and I feel the sacredness of the rocks and the creek and the dirt and so forth. And I have some things that symbolize that. I have a separate place where I collect things that either were given to me, or we could say found, or we could say the world gave them to me. Um, and that's instructions from another tradition. And he said, don't put this stuff on your altar, but have a place where you put it. So I do. Um,
So,
I,
so Shoto, I'll just say I have a photo of you, and it's probably 30 years old or more, and you are bowing to a set of deer antlers. Do you remember that
yes,
photo?
I remember that, the women's retreat. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Shoto is actually doing full prostrations to a set of deer antlers that I'm guessing you found. The earth gave them to you during that retreat.
Wait, found what?
I'm guessing you found those antlers during the retreat. The earth gave them to you somehow during that retreat. Do you remember? I don't know.
Well, we found them. I'm not
Yeah.
sure who encountered them. And
Uh,
I was not the only one who did those bows.
I see. It looked
Um,
like there was a ceremony happening of some kind.
yeah, there was some kind of ceremony,
Yes.
and people
So,
were offering. Everybody was offering something, and some of us made that bow. Somebody, I think it was nyoho who did it first, but I'm not.
okay.
No, that's not right. I don't remember. There was like 30 or 40 women.
As
So,
you were talking, I was just remembering that image that I have of,
right,
one
yeah,
way to create sacred
yeah,
space is to acknowledge
yeah,
those things.
yeah. And an offering, an action is an offering, and a chant is an offering, and putting on the special clothes is an offering.
Mhm.
And so it's like I've been out in the woods and felt the need to make an offering. There's always something you can do.
Yep, that's right. Good.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for those words. I just thought, what a wonderful coincidence that this happens to be the week that you're here, because this is a topic I know that you feel deeply about and that you practice deeply with. So it's good to connect on that. I want to give other people online an opportunity to say, ask, reflect, and offer anything you'd like to offer, either about what I've said, what Shoto said, or people in the room, or things that are coming up for you related to sacred space, Nyoho shelter, anything like that on your mind. Rimon, please.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was very helpful today. I think we can sometimes hear what we need to hear in talks. That might be feel a little specific to situations in our lives. And so what I was hearing was a lot of momentum in practice, right? How maintaining this momentum through consistency and the things that you described, and how to do that. Um, so maybe the answer is in the question, right? I'm not sure, but I just wondered if you had anything additional or anything you could add to with maintaining the momentum of practice.
Mm-hmm. So by momentum, for momentum, I'm going to substitute perhaps support, enabling, consistency. I'm not going to substitute that, but right. I mean, I think that's what I'm hearing. And the question is, how do we keep ourselves practicing, right? So I think considering sacred space is one useful way to do that, right? Because on the one hand, if we create a space and we do the kinds of things that Sawyer was talking about, how do I think about the space that I'm in, what that represents for me? It means there's never, or the things that Doji was talking about, there's never a time when we're not practicing, right? At what point are we walking out of the practice space? It can't actually happen, right? If we're always in a practice space, we're always remembering, this is mindfulness, right? Remembering what Buddha taught. We sort of keep that momentum going. So sometimes it's going to be a simmer, and sometimes it's going to be, we're practicing pretty intensively, right? But there's never a time when we're not practicing. So I think any element of our practice that reminds us about that keeps the momentum going, right? Making sure that we have practice support, ways that are things that are helpful for us, whether that's practicing with a sangha, consistency, making sure we have a clean, nice space to sit at home, whatever that means. I think sacred space and considering the space of our practice can be an important element of that, right? Yeah. Other comments, questions, reflections, people at home, people in the room? Okay. Oh, Shoto, please.
One more thought.
Good.
In my life, normally, so I just at the beginning of this trip stopped shaving my head.
Hmm.
So in my life, normally, as a public figure, I am either a Zen priest, a man, or a person with cancer. But
Yep.
anyway, it's like it never leaves me. And I now, nobody's mistaken me for a man in 2 months. And I can hide.
Hmm.
If I don't put on the special clothes, you don't know that I'm representing Zen. And that's just very interesting.
Mhm.
And I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. It's like I noticed that most women have short hair. Most women priests have short hair, but I haven't decided what to do yet. So, but it's an interesting quality about always being in a space to always be seen as something. And so my responsibility as to how I act and how I move is like it's always there.
Yep, yep. So that is one of the interesting gateways of ordination, right? Especially for women. Yes, I know. So it is interesting how when we consider robes or what we look like or the physical sort of representation of practice, what kind of space that creates too. So there's so many layers to this question, right? So many things we can think about related to space. So interesting. We've brought up a lot of sort of interesting permutations of that today. So interesting conversation. Anything else today from anybody? All right. Thank you so much. Let's do our closing chant.